Hello and welcome. Today I interview Dr. Jane Aspell, a cognitive neuroscientist who studies the bodily basis for our sense of self. Jane explains that contrary to the common idea that your identity is formed from characteristics such as hobbies or behaviours, research shows that it appears to be based on basic feelings arising inside your body. We also talk about the function of emotions and problems they can cause, as well as the link between acts of generosity and what we feel inside our body. Remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense YouTube channel for more of this kind of video, as well as updates on a new project I'm beginning with Jane at Anglia Ruskin University. Hello, thanks for joining me, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your research today. We've spoken lots before, but I haven't really found out much about all the different ways that you explore a person's sense of self in your laboratory. So maybe we could start there. Can you summarize the different aspects of this obscure idea of sense of self that you study?
Yes, Ian. So I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, so I'm interested how the brain generates a sense of self. And I suppose people watching this might think, well, they'll already have ideas about what a self is. Of course, everybody has ideas about that because everybody has one, and everybody is one. And most people, when they think about the self, would probably think about personality. So, I'm the kind of person who, likes to go for walks in nature or read books or do computer gaming or whatever it is. I'm kind, I'm introvert, I'm, all these kind of things that would describe you as a person. But as a neuroscientist, I'm interested in, I suppose, something kind of deeper than that. So what is it that underlies our personality? How is our brain generating that sense of self? And I'm looking at sort of more basic levels of self, I suppose, than personality, and in particular how the self relates to the body. So my research focuses on the bodily self, because if you think about sort of what you are and who you are, if you think about perhaps yourself as a baby, you maybe there's some little bit of personality there even from the beginning, but of course personality is something that develops. So at the beginning you are essentially a body, and your brain has to figure out sort of where the boundary lies between your body and the rest of the world,
Right.
and the difference between your body and other bodies. And there's quite a bit of research now, although it's fairly recent, that shows that, or that seems to indicate that all these kind of higher levels of self, like personality, identity, are actually built on something simpler. And that foundation is the brain's representation of the body. So our brains, of course, receive this huge amount of information from our bodies every single second. And our brains have to represent that. They have to map that and monitor that in order to control our body and keep us alive. So there are all these maps in your brain of your body. And we think that those maps of the body provide the foundation then for even higher levels of self. So I do various experiments in my lab that try and investigate how that sense of bodily self is generated by the brain.
Wow, so that's quite a different way of thinking about our sense of self. If the foundation is the body, then all these ideas, we have all these thoughts about, as you said, our job or our relationships or the things we do day to day. They're sitting on top of this foundation of feelings or maps of things coming from the body. I've seen you've made use of virtual reality machines to kind of get a picture of how this might work. How did that work? What did you gain from those experiments?
Yeah, so that's quite fun. We use virtual reality in our lab. I think that the reason that we use virtual reality is in order to investigate the self, or in order to investigate kind of most things in science, you need to somehow perturb it or disturb it or kind of modify it. So, if you want to understand how a radio works, then you might sort of take out one part and see what effect it has. So, if you remove the speaker and you can't hear any sound anymore, that's maybe telling you that part is, making the sound. So you can't really, remove parts of the self in the way that you could with a mechanical object. And because it's so fundamental to our consciousness, it's actually really difficult to sort of perturb or disturb. But virtual reality is one experimental method that we can use to temporarily alter our experience of ourself. And so that's what we use it for. So we're able to modify somebody's experience of themselves using really quite simple virtual reality, and giving the brain conflicting information from different senses, and then that leads to some quite strange changes in the participant's experience.
So I've only used a virtual reality headset once or twice. I can't really remember too much about it. How does that work then in an experimental sense? How are you tricking their sense? What illusion did you create?
So one that I use quite a lot, it's sometimes referred to as a virtual out-of-body experience. So one way to look at the brain basis of self is to look at patients who have disturbances of self. So people who have out-of-body experiences is one example of that. But these patients are very rare. So we wanted to find a way to create something a bit like an out-of-body experience in a healthy person in the lab, sort of whenever we wanted to. And so we can do that with virtual reality. It's not as strong, of course, as the experience of someone who has an OBE. But what it involves is it's really simple setup. So you have a video camera in the lab that's filming you from behind.
Okay.
And then you wear a virtual reality headset, and that's connected to the camera. So as soon as you put it on, you sort of see what the camera sees.
Okay.
So given that it's behind you, once you put this headset on, you can see yourself from behind. So it's as though I'm standing behind myself. And then at the same time, we do other things. For example, you have another person in the room tapping you on the back. So you feel these taps on your back while you look at your sort of virtual self being tapped on the back in front of you.
Okay.
And it's a really simple setup, but it causes some really strange sort of experiences. And one of these is that you start to feel that yourself isn't located in your body anymore, but it's located kind of in front of you where you see that virtual body, which is a bit like an out-of-body experience. In an out-of-body experience, their sense of self seems to be located at the ceiling, looking down at their body. So there's a split between where the physical body seems to be and where the self seems to be located. And these are all really weird kind of ideas. You don't normally think about where your self is, do you? But if you think about it now, where is my self? Obviously, it's in my body. Most people think that their self, it seems to be in their head rather than in their hand or in their foot. So if you ask most people, they'd say in the head. Some people say in the chest. But using virtual reality, we can disturb that sense of where the self seems to be located and to make it seem as though the self is outside of the body. So that's one of the disturbances we can create. And obviously it's temporary.
And what kind of clues did you learn from that about this idea of the foundation of self being in the body?
So what's happening there is that we're creating a conflict between what you see and what you feel. So you're feeling the touch on your back, but you're seeing the touch on this body in front of you, and that's tricking the brain then into sort of computing where the sense of self is. The sense of self seems to be now in front of me rather than in my body. And what that shows is that this experience of where our self is has to be generated by the brain. It has to figure that out. And the information it uses to figure that out is information from different senses. And that information has to be combined. So information from touch, from vision, from your vestibular, your balance sense, even from hearing. All of those different signals get combined to create our sense of self, which is usually located in our body. But if you disturb those signals using virtual reality, then that can trick the brain into generating a different kind of experience.
Wow.
Yeah. So so the real point of it is that it's multisensory. It's many different senses from both the inside and the outside of the body that have to be combined to create that experience of our bodies and ourselves.
It's not something I would have thought of day to day, or, my attention sometimes is on, I'm more aware of visual things, or I'm more aware of sound, or sometimes I might feel something in my body and my attention's drawn to that, but I've never really thought until speaking to you and finding out about this type of research. I wouldn't have thought about how they somehow magically combine to create this sense of self. I guess from that point of view, then it's changing all the time, our sense of self. If the input is changing, you've created an extreme example of that from virtual reality, but day to day, does that mean that our sense of self is continuously changing?
Yeah, so it's not as though, your brain kind of figured out all of this about your body and yourself when you were a baby and that was it. It's actually every moment it's having to make these computations, and that's why it's malleable. That's why you can change it. That's why you can experience a virtual body or an avatar or a rubber hand as being part of your body. So if you're under the right conditions, your sense of self can sort of expand to include even things like tools, maybe even kind of your car or something to some extent. Our self isn't kind of fixed. Its boundaries are a bit malleable given the right conditions. And it has to be generated and regenerated every moment, really.
Continuously being formed in the moment. You've the reason why I connected with you a few months ago was your focus on a type of bodily sense of self called interoception, which is the signals from inside the body, this foundation you're talking about. You've studied that in lots of different ways, more ways than I thought was possible. Can you run through a few of those experiments or studies?
So we're finding, not me, but lots of other scientists as well have found that interoception is linked to all kinds of different aspects of our cognitive functioning and linked to lots of different disorders as well. And so I've looked at it in relation to autism, in relation to body image, in relation to addiction. Some of the recent studies which were carried out by my PhD student, Jenny Todd, were looking at interactions between body image and interoception. So body image, most people probably have heard about that. You usually think about it maybe in reference to, women's magazines where people are kind of worried about their body image because they're comparing themselves to some kind of, societal ideal of, being slim, being, beautiful and so on.
And the guys wanting to get their biceps ready for the beach.
Yeah, of course. Men as well are worried about body image. So body image is something that is kind of the other side to interoception. So interoception, as you said, is our brains processing signals from inside the body, but body image refers to thoughts, opinions, beliefs, perceptions of the external body. So it's, what I think about how I look, for example. So it's particularly in relation to other people as well. So, how other people view me. So it's all about the external body, whereas interoception is the perception of the internal body. So it's interesting to look at if there's some relation between those two. And you might expect, perhaps, if you are very good at interoception, then perhaps your body image might be more positive, for example. So it might be if you don't have a strong sense of your inner self, that you would pay more attention to the outer self and perhaps be more influenced by society's ideals or by what other people say, by what other people think you should look like, for example. So perhaps those things need to be in balance. And if one is off balance, then that could affect the other one. So yeah, my PhD student did a series of studies looking at this. So she found, for example, that people who are better at interoception tend to have more positive body image. And that relates to previous findings that showed people who are worse at interoception have more negative body image. So if you have negative body image, you tend to feel, negatively about your body. You might feel things like shame or embarrassment, have some kind of negative opinion about it. Whereas if you have positive body image, then you might appreciate what your body can do, its functions, its health, these kinds of things. So there does seem to be this inverse relation. If you have a stronger sense of the inner self, then it might be that that's somehow protecting you from being perhaps too focused on the external self and being perhaps susceptible to what other people sort of say or what society seems to be saying about how you should look. And so that suggests that having this strong sense of internal body awareness is a good thing and could perhaps even be sort of protective against, the problems that negative body image can lead to. For example, people with eating disorders tend to have negative body image. And of course, having negative body image might be linked to other mental health problems.
So your PhD student looked at the positive aspect of that. So people who have this real kind of good collection of or good connection to feelings in their body seem to be more robust or resilient to negative body image. How do you measure that ability to feel into the body? Are there, I'm aware there are lots of different ways, but in this example, how was your PhD student measuring their interest?
Yeah, she's used different measures in different studies. So one way to measure it is with a questionnaire. Mm-hmm. So there are a few questionnaires that have been used by lots of researchers, and they have statements, things like, I tend to notice when I'm thirsty, I often feel my heart beating, these kinds of things. So tending to notice these signals from the inside, like hunger, thirst, heart beating, these kinds of things. So that would be self-report. So you would agree or disagree. And, yeah, if you tend to be agreeing with statements where you tend to notice these sort of sensations, then you would sort of score high on what's called interoceptive awareness. So that's that sort of subjective high level awareness of these internal sensations. So she's used these kind of questionnaires, and then she uses questionnaires again to measure body image. So asking statements about how you feel about your outward appearance, or how you feel about whether you appreciate the functions of your body, the health of your body, and so on. And then she also uses behavioral measures. For example, she looks at gut interoception. So that's the ability to detect signals from the stomach and the intestines. And of course, we tend to be aware of, if we feel hunger or if we've got a bit of wind or something like that, then that could enter awareness. So you need to find some kind of way to measure that in the lab. It's not the easiest thing to measure. So one way to do that is using something called the water load task, where you ask people to fast for 3 hours, and they come into the lab, and you give them a flask, which you can't see, it's opaque, so you can't see how much water is in it, and then you have to drink as much water with a straw, so you don't lift it up, until you feel full. And then she measures how much water has been drunk. So that's kind of quite a crude measure, but it does seem to correlate. So people who who score better on that task also show more positive body image.
From what you've learned on kind of body image and interception or other aspects of your research, what advice would you give maybe to yourself as a teenager? Because I'm thinking of myself going through teenage years, and there was all these difficult feelings about body image and comparing myself to others. Are there any insights we can get from your research and other people's research that might help teenagers?
Yeah. Obviously, adolescence is a really difficult time, and it's around. I mean, it used to be around sort of from 13 onwards. These feelings of negative body image suddenly seem to increase a lot. Although that age now seems to be getting younger. So, yeah, teenagers suddenly become really aware of how they look and how other people maybe want them to look, how they should look, and that can cause a lot of distress for some teenagers. I mean, you always tell your children that it's what's inside that's important, don't you? It's how you behave towards other people. It's your personality. These things are more important than how you look. I suppose to somehow emphasize that, in a sense, it's not just about perhaps personality, but if you can also listen to your internal body, that can perhaps make your sense of self more robust to these external influences, and that you are not so swayed by what other people want of you and expect of you. There's a lot of work that shows that this robust sense of self is protective against a lot of potential mental health problems. And I think there's some variation that's just perhaps there, I don't know, from birth, but maybe because of the kind of life you've had and the family you've grown up in. But some research now is starting to show that it's not necessarily fixed. So it might be that perhaps you don't naturally have perhaps this very robust sense of self and this tendency to listen to your body. But even if that's the case, it seems to be that you can train it. So there are certain techniques that could be followed to put you more in tune with that internal sense of self, and that then could make you more resilient, I suppose, to these external sort of pressures. And so it might be that some kind of intervention in children to help them tune in more to these internal sensations could perhaps be protective, from body image issues. I mean, this is all early work, and we'd need to do the research, but that's what I would predict, really.
And so then, the sense of self and the emotions we feel and sensations in the body, it's starting to get a picture where all these things are linked together. I see you've done some research on emotion and people who have differing abilities to understand their emotions. What did you find there?
Yeah, so you can measure how people are able to understand their own emotions, and that includes the ability to sort of put their emotions into words. So some people are really good at that and describing and identifying and conveying to somebody else how they feel, but other people find that more difficult. So they might not be really sure if they feel angry or anxious, that the emotions might become a little bit blurred. And we think that's partly related to how they are processing these signals from their body and interpreting signals from their body, because all emotions, all strong emotions seem to have this bodily component. So if you feel angry, your heart might be racing, your face might be flushed, you might feel a sort of tension in your body. Whereas if you're feeling happy, then those body sensations are going to be really different. So some people have difficulty distinguishing the different body states which correspond to different emotions. and that can be measured with questionnaires. And we find that people who have autism often have difficulty with this. Not all people with autism, but some people with autism have problems. So we've done some studies. Again, a different PhD student, two different PhD students have worked on this, looking at interactions between this ability to experience and characterize and articulate emotions and how sensitive somebody is to these internal body states. And they seem to correlate quite a lot. So people who are more sensitive to these internal body states tend to be better at emotional understanding in their own self.
From personal experience, I can think of times when it's hard to figure out what I'm actually feeling myself. And, it might be, I know I'm feeling something in my body, but I don't quite know how I want to express that or what I want to do with that feeling. So, yeah, it does make sense.
There was a big study by Tanya Singer a few years ago where she didn't just find, I suppose, a correlation, but something that almost was suggesting a causation. So she found that if people did a body scan meditation for many months, that what you saw across that time is that their ability to sense signals from inside their body improved, and also their emotional self-understanding improved over the same time scale as well. I mean, it's not 100% clear if this is the case, but it seems suggestive that meditation was improving both internal body awareness and emotional understanding. Or it could be that because it improved internal body awareness, that then had a knock-on effect to emotional understanding. But it shows how all of these things are really interlinked. And also it shows that, again, these things are not fixed, that you can change them. If perhaps you have difficulties with emotional understanding, that's something that could be actually trained and improved.
Yeah, and what's your personal sort of view then on the relationship between an emotion, or the purpose of bodily feelings and emotion for everyday life? And this is maybe not, you don't have to base this on science, it's just from when you piece all these bits of information together, what function do emotions and bodily sensations have for humans?
Keep us alive.
Keep us alive.
Yeah, and I think the function of emotions in us is not essentially different than it is from other animals. Emotions, what they do is help us to place value on the world, on events, on things that happen, on objects. They sort of steer us through life. They help us to learn what's good and what's bad for us. So, the first time you see an apple, you don't know if that's good or bad. It's just a green object. But once you taste it, it tastes sweet. Then your brain will associate a positive emotion with that. That's something that's good. And then the next time you see an apple, you have, if you're hungry, then that will cause a sort of positive emotion in you. The first time you see a snake, it might not seem like a bad thing. If it bites you, if you ever see a snake again, then you can have a negative emotion to it. So it helps you ascribe value to things. And without that, we'd be completely lost. And there is such a strong link between our bodily changes. So whenever you have a strong emotion, that there always is this bodily change. And usually that bodily change helps prepare you for something. So, the reason that your heart beats really fast when you're frightened is because that's preparing you potentially to run away from the thing that's frightening you, or to fight with the thing that's frightening you. So, that there are adaptive reasons. It's not kind of random which body sensation is paired with which emotion. It's to prepare your body to react to that thing. But I suppose the problem in everyday life is that we're often frightened of things that we can't run away from or we can't fight. And yet we still have those sensations. So if we're constantly feeling fear, but we can't really do anything about the thing that's causing the fear, then that can have problems on our problems for our health, I suppose. And so the challenge for a lot of people, and I suppose the reason that there are so many mental health problems, is to deal with those body sensations that are ever present, that are caused by these strong emotions. If we can't run away from the thing, then how else can we deal with these body sensations, I suppose?
Yeah, how else can we? We can't change the world around us. Well, we can't influence it that much all the time. Like to a lot of the time, but we can't.
Yeah.
So what can we do about the feelings as they arise, as you said? Great. Also, so that the examples there are something really nice, like an apple, or something potentially threatening, like a snake. They're kind of non-human things. I know you've studied also something more socially relevant, the idea of altruism. What did you learn from those studies, and how did you study altruism?
Yeah, so altruism is when you are behaving in a way that benefits somebody else but has a cost to yourself. So, for example, giving somebody money, that means that then you aren't able to buy something that you would otherwise have bought because you're benefiting somebody else. So we wanted to see in this study whether there was a link between our sensitivity to our inner bodies and how altruistic somebody was. And that might seem like a weird thing to expect a link in, but if you think about the link between emotions and inner body sensations, and altruistic acts are always acts that will generate some kind of emotion. So, even for the person who's been altruistic. So, if I'm helping somebody or giving money to somebody, usually I would feel some kind of positive emotion from that. I feel good because I helped somebody. Or it could be that if I don't help somebody, then I feel guilty. So whether you do it or whether you don't do it, it has some kind of emotional resonance. And there's research that has shown people who are more sensitive to these inner body states, like their heart, their gut, and so on, tend to experience emotions more intensely. So putting these things together, then you might expect that people who are more sensitive to internal body states might feel these emotions associated with altruistic acts more strongly, and therefore might be more altruistic. So we looked at that in the lab. How do you measure altruism? So there's a way to really kind of quantify it. So we have this computer-based task, and people have to make repeated choices. So we ask them, do you want to give 40 pence to another person, or do you want to keep 20 pence for yourself? Or do you want to give £1.20 to another person, or do you want to give £1.50 to yourself? And they just have to make a choice every time out of these two alternatives. And they're told that how they choose actually will affect how much real money they get at the end of the experiment. Okay. And it will affect how much money another real person gets at the end of the experiment. So it's not just hypothetical.
Do they know whether it means they'll get more money or less money, or whether the other person gets more or less, or do they just?
Well, if they keep giving more money to the other person, then that's obviously that person will get more money than if they never made that choice.
Oh, I see.
Makes sense. Yeah. So because you're always having to choose to give money to myself or money to the other person, but the amounts keep changing, so it's difficult to keep track of. So you just asking them over and over and over again, are you benefiting yourself or the other person? So you do the 60 times. It's a task that's been used before, and then at the end of it you can work out, because you're saving their responses, how much money they've allocated to the other person, and that's then the index of generosity. So if you've given more money to the other person, you're more generous than another participant who's given less money. So we really quantify that way. And then we measure interception with its heartbeat detection task, where so they've got the ECG electrodes, which is measuring their heartbeat. Every time they have a heartbeat, the computer generates a sound, beep, beep, beep. But sometimes it's generating sounds which are out of sync with the heartbeat. And they have to say, are those sounds they hear in time with their heartbeat or not? And again, they're asked that lots of times. And some people are more accurate than that than others. So essentially, you need to have some kind of good, accurate perception of when your heartbeat is beaten, when your heart is beaten, to know whether that's in time with the beeps or not. And you're not able to feel your pulse or anything. You're just feeling it from, from your chest, from the inside. And what we found was a really strong correlation between the two tasks. So people who are better at this heartbeat task were giving more money to the other participant. Really, really strong correlation. And yeah, we don't fully understand why that is. As I said, it might be because they just experience those emotional changes sort of more intensely. So if they didn't give the money to the other person, they'd feel guilty and they'd feel that as an aversive thing that makes them give the money, or they just feel an enormous sense of reward, perhaps, of giving to somebody else. But yeah, that was interesting that the correlation was so strong.
Yes, potentially massive implications for how our society works and how our economy works, how business works, maybe. And I'm sure lots of fundraising organisations would like to know who are the most people with the strongest sense of interception.
Yeah, and they could target them.
Great. That's been really good. I've dipped into some of your research, but it's been lovely to hear more about it. Where do you see your research going in the future? What's coming up, or where do you see this field of work going?
Yeah, we're just finding more and more how important interception is in so many different disorders and mental health and physical health. They're calling it almost the P factor now, because it seems to be, interception is related to depression, to schizophrenia, to chronic pain, to anorexia, so many different conditions. And we don't quite know why. So that needs more investigation. And it's one thing to show that they're related, but the next step would be to see whether this knowledge can be then created into some kind of intervention. So can we help people who have various problems by perhaps improving their interoceptive awareness in some way? So that, there are various studies looking into that at the moment. I'm just starting a project looking at links between interception and chronic pain. So that's in its early stages. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential. So hopefully it's going to yield some good results and some helpful interventions in the future.
Well, I certainly find it fascinating, and it's when I discovered there was this whole field of work being done, my ears pricked up. So thank you so much for sharing that today, and I really look forward to carrying on with the research project with you and finding out how you and all the other scientists studying interception develop, and we can all benefit, hopefully, in years to come.
Yeah, thanks, Ian.
Thank you very much.